Good evening, everybody. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. My glasses back up so I can see all of you. So again, thank you so much for coming tonight for our wonderful artist reception for Rob Lay, who we're really excited to have here tonight. For those of you that don't know who I am Diane Ruggiero. I'm a Deputy Director with the City's Recreation, Parks, and Cultural Activities Department, and I lead the City's Office of the Arts, which includes the City's Public Art Program. And we're really happy to be here tonight to celebrate the collaboration between the City of Alexandria's Office of the Arts and the Public Art Program and WMATA's Art and Transit Program. But before I say anything more, I do want to welcome some of our city officials. So Mayor Wilson, thank you for being here. So thank you so much for coming. And council members Aguirre and Bagley, thank you so much for being here as well. And I also should thank them for their ongoing support of the arts. They are regular attendees at most of our arts events. So thank you all for being here. So I'm not going to talk too much, but we're just really excited to welcome a new piece of public art to Alexandria's collection. This will be the first piece of public art at a metro station here in Alexandria. So it's a really big deal. We hope it's not going to be the last piece of public art at a metro station here in Alexandria, but it's a really great way to kind of kick off this collaboration. But there's better people here to talk about it, so I'm actually going to turn the microphone over to Laurent Ode, who is with WMATA's Art and Transit Program. So Laurent?
All right. Just do it so using a mic like this. All right. So thank you, everybody. Good evening. Thank you, Diane, so much for having us tonight. All right. So I wanted to thank obviously Diane for all the things she's done and to make this a great project, and also the committee members who helped us select the best artists for this station, and of course the City of Alexandria, for without which the project will actually not be what it is. So I know the star of the evening is Rob Lay, and I will try to keep things short, but I wanted to introduce him a little bit and give some information about Rob. So Rob has a degree in architecture, master in architecture from the University of California, Los Angeles, and currently teaches at the University of Southern California. He has lectured and exhibited internationally on the topic of public art, design, technology, and innovation for the public sphere. Through all of this, as an artist and as the founder of Rob Lay Studio, I think I'm correct. Rob still managed to find time to devote himself to inventing new, reinventing places and looking at spaces, the public spaces. Sorry, so back a little too close this time. All right, so his work has include installation throughout the country. He's worked in New York, in Chicago. I know some of his work is going to show to us tonight, Indianapolis and Los Angeles. And he's been awarded several notable awards. In 2015, Rob received an American for the Arts Public Art Network Year in Review Award. He's received multiple grants from the American Institute of Architects. And I guess one last thing before I hand over the mic to Rob, I want to also express how this project is very important for Metro. As Diane mentioned earlier, this is the first station in Alexandria that will receive a piece of public art. It is also the first artwork that will allow in the country to allow a transit system to get a credit as part of the LEED accreditation for the station. So through the biophilic design that Rob is actually working on, Metro will receive a credit for the LEED through the LEED accreditation. So Rob, this is yours now.
Okay,
thank you so much, and thank you everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Laurent. Yeah, so I appreciate you guys all coming. I'll tell you, I've been teaching for a number of years, and in that time, I felt like I've gotten pretty good at public speaking. I don't get nervous, but I'm a little bit nervous. I was hoping there'd be about 3 people here tonight, so but I am glad you're all here. As Laurent said, my background, I thought I wanted to be an architect. As long as I could remember, I was really interested in the public realm and how cities and neighborhoods are shaped and how identities are created. And so for that reason, I wanted to be an architect. And so I got an undergraduate degree in architecture, went out to Los Angeles and got a master's degree in architecture. Hit the escape key. And the week that I was to graduate after 7 years of architecture school, I had an opportunity to go work for one of the most well-respected architecture firms in the country, Morphosis, or to go help a friend of a friend who was a public artist for a few weeks. And I thought, well, I'm going to try the second one first because I don't really know what that is, but it sounds kind of fun. And so 2 weeks turned into about 3 or 4 years. And so and in that time, what I saw was there was this real potential for public art to have some of the things that architecture and urban planning and landscape architecture can kind of offer the city, but it also has one foot in the kind of the gallery art world in which it's unencumbered by things that need to be pragmatic or functional and whatnot. And so I think it became very clear to me this is what I want to do, and so I started my own studio after working for a few other artists. And I'm very passionate in it, and I've encouraged people to go into this, so I appreciate that you guys all came. And I would like to, rather than just talking, I wanted to show, of course, the proposal for the, you say station. I always think it's 2 stations, but it's technically 1 station. But I wanted to show a couple relatively recent works from my studio that are completed, maybe as a way of just introducing, maybe what I would say, how experience and understanding who the user or who the viewer is, and how they're seeing the artwork, and how it starts to shape maybe their sense of place. So the first piece I'm going to show 2 projects. The first one is a very large parking structure art facade in Indianapolis, and I had this is maybe about 6 or 7 years ago, maybe 8. I had done an interactive temporary art installation in New York a few years before that the president of the hospital had seen. And so we started a dialogue and said, we're doing this huge hospital, but the thing is we have this enormous parking garage that everybody's going to see first as they come into this complex. Would you create a kinetic, moving sculpture that we could put on the building? And I said, no, I can't do that because that sounds lovely, but there are a lot of complex issues when you start having things moving all the time. And so, but I said, what would be a more interesting challenge is let's create something maybe that doesn't move at all, but that offers a degree of variability. So as people move to the site, what they see maybe from the east side, which are this kind of deep blue color, would start to transition into these other colors to the point where on the far extreme side, maybe go back, Laurent? What they start to see is this imagery that starts to appear in the artwork. And so in a way, and this is something I'll talk about with the project I'm going to share with you guys for our project here, is it's borrowing from an interest I've had for a while, which are things that are often very low tech or low key or coming from the printmaking or graphic design world. So a lot of people in this room probably remember those little stickers as children that when you tilt the sticker, it looks like something is animating. It's called a lenticular image. So very, very simple approach. If you have these elements and you paint it one color on one side and you paint it another color on the other, and then we write the special software that will control the way that geometry works, it creates something that appears to be moving and appears to be changing as people move around the site, even though it doesn't. And maybe, Laurent, can we play the first video, maybe? There's some nice music, but we won't hear that tonight. That's okay. And so maybe I'll just talk about what's going. So there's. I will say that I'm very fortunate. The works that I'm showing tonight, both the past ones and even the ones we're working on currently for your community, is usually the product of a lot of people. So while have a hand in the conceptualization of it, and I end up being kind of the de facto project manager, there's a lot of people that help in terms of, you know, we write custom software that helps to kind of create these forms that you're seeing. That lovely car was my fabricator's car. He just happened to have a super cool 1960s Lincoln for the video. That's always really nice. But anyway, as you see here, you know, as I said, as people move around, you know, it really offers something different. There's certain things, like if anybody's been to Indianapolis in the wintertime, everything is gray or red. Red brick and gray everything else. And so I've heard from people, it's funny, after this was done, the biggest comment I heard was, we like the yellow. It wasn't that it moves or it changes, it was just, we like the yellow in the wintertime. And so, you know, I'll take that, I like that. I think it's almost over. There you go. There's also these really nice accidents, like where you don't plan it, but the way that it reads on the inside was actually a really, really fortunate kind of accident. But, you know, that also will take. So maybe we can move on. Control L. There you go, great. Thank you, Lon. The next piece, the second of the two I wanted to show, this was also a large-scale artwork. A few years ago, I was contacted by the city of Chicago. They were doing, like many cities, doing a huge expansion to the airport, and they were building this enormous rental car facility with this enormous wall that was, I don't know, 400 feet long. So imagine something that's longer than like a football field. And they give us it was a very interesting challenge. They said, for reasons that aren't that interesting, we have to have an artwork created and fabricated, installed in about 5 months, and it's enormous. Would you be interested in it? And you know, it's having lived in Chicago for many years, I was and not having any work there, I was very interested in doing this. But it's interesting that the first answer was no, and then I slept on it, and I think what it became was just a really interesting constraint. And as a lot of designers know, you start to think, boy, I can't wait until I get to a place where I can just do anything for any amount of money with any amount of schedule. And that actually is not what you want, because then it's like you have nothing to start from. So the idea of having to do an almost like a very large artwork in a short amount of time really forced a level of maybe being clever. And so this was what we kind of proposed. And Laurent, I'm kind of skipping past the inception. Maybe I'll come to this. If we go back and play video number 2, I think I'll put a pin on that. I'll come back to that in a moment. I think the other thing was, as you travel a lot, as maybe a lot of people do, you see a lot of artwork at airports that have this very kind of on-the-nose nautical flight kind of theme. And not wanting to kind of fall into that. Is that playing or not? Is it just kind of slow? Thank you. So in the beginning of the conceptualization, it was really thinking about not so much flight and motifs of aircraft, but it was really thinking about things that are invisible. And so you think about the way we learn as a child how lift works with a wing. We also understand what turbulence is when you're inside the airplane, but not really knowing that there's constantly these swirls and eddies of wind behind you as you fly, which are all, again, invisible until you fly through a cloud. And what really struck me a little bit was, in this next sequence that's coming up, is, could an artwork start to make visible to users of the building something that's otherwise invisible? And that seemed like an interesting kind of challenge. And we've seen, we actually can see the wind. The wind just has to show up in something else, some other index, like a grassy field. Thanks, Laurent. If we go back. I know this is a hard job, having to man the computer. Thank you. So what was conceived was, if you go back, can you go back? Sorry. So because of the short time span, the idea was, could we create this enormous artwork with one part? And the thing would be that the part would be mass produced, like manufactured, ironically by an aerospace company in Los Angeles, in Burbank. So while that wasn't the plan, it was a funny kind of coincidence. But it's this element you see here, which is a little less than 6 feet long, and there's just 7,000 of them. And so that economy of scale meant they could just kind of make these morning, noon, and night. But the variation that you see you know, as the artwork takes on these swirling patterns, is really a product more of how we screw them to the wall. Like you have each piece is screwed to the wall with 2 screws, but how you rotate it as you screw it, if you orchestrate it, can actually start to create these like very fluid, you know, going back to that grass field, these kind of very large compositions that give the illusion of movement. And Lauren, would you mind, I know we're getting on the video, I think it is, go back to the videos, please. It's maybe 3rd one down, I believe. 3rd one, yeah, please. So this is what people are greeted with as they kind of come in to rent their rental car at the airport. And I think you'll see it's hard sometimes to convey some of the experiential part of these artworks in the video, which we try as best we can. But you know, in some cases here, you can see that it looks like these things are moving in your periphery as you go by. So, you know, so again, a very short project, but I'm extremely happy with how this turned out. Okay, I think that we're almost done with the videos. Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Laurent. By the way, funny enough, so this is during our installation, and the only way we knew how to really control how these pieces would go on the wall is we had to print these enormous drawings for the entire wall, and someone had actually said it might be a world record for a full-size elevation drawing. You know, normally drawings are scaled smaller for obvious reasons. This was a 1-to-1 elevation of a 300-foot long. You know, I thought that was kind of funny. Okay, so I want to talk. Maybe I'll transition into what you all are hopefully going to see and experience a little bit later this spring. And so, I think one thing that is hard to kind of explain to people, but I try is. There's an idea that an artist has an idea or a singular idea and they move forward with that. And it's a little messier for me. A lot of times it's taking in a lot of information from different sources and trying to figure out what might be interesting in that. And as someone who is sometimes coming in, because I don't live in the neighborhood or the community, I do think because the type of work I do is very site specific, there's always this kind of learning curve. I want to learn about what makes a particular place interesting and unique. And I think one of the things that was most striking for me, besides these kind of interesting historical moments in the life of the Potomac Yard, was just how, you know, I live in a city that is hard to find things 100 years ago, and so it's interesting to be in a place where there's things happening in the 1600s. I think that's super, super interesting. But you know, what I learned in this kind of process of acquainting myself with the community and particularly the Potomac Yard, is just like what that transition's been like from this highly industrialized, you know, from farming fields to then like these a train line, 2 train lines, 10 train lines, to becoming this very significant, you know, this massive kind of hub on the East Coast, and for periods of time being the largest kind of rail yard in the world. I think that's, you know, super interesting, and not to mention, more interestingly, how that has now transitioned into a completely different use, right? It was probably saying things that everybody in this room knows already, but the fact that it went through this transition as a Superfund site to deal with just years and years of diesel and oil and heavy metals, and this kind of transition of this enormous tract of land, you know, into this like rolling park and multi-use space with commercial and residential, and of course now light rail. And so when I introduced myself, I said I'm really excited about the potential for public art to help people kind of create an identity for their neighborhood. I don't think an artwork by itself does that, but you know, it's one of many things that allows people to kind of have an identity with where they live, and even more so with train stations. As someone who spent years taking the train to work and taking the train back, you know, at some point you start to look forward to seeing your train stop, because it means you're almost home. And so I'm thinking about a lot of these things as I kind of approach this. And this is kind of issue number one. I think just to give maybe some bearing, so we're really talking about a North Pavilion and a South Pavilion. So this is backwards a little bit, but I believe this is the North Pavilion down here, and our South Pavilion on this side. And so, while, as I mentioned earlier, it's considered one station, but it's quite a distance between the two, which is also, I think, kind of interesting. So, yes, yeah. Move on. So as I said, I think there's three things I want to talk about with this project. One has to do with inspiration. As Laurent said, that there was this. It was something in the brief at the beginning that an artist should consider a biophilic design. Am I saying that correct? Yeah. This biophilic design, and I've heard what the meaning of biophilic, being inspired by nature in different forms, but I found that actually kind of interesting. I wasn't sure what that would mean or how that would show up in the artwork, but I like the challenge of that. So that's kind of inspiration. I think there's also imagery. Imagery shows up, is something I like to include in the work that I do. In the first project I shared, while I didn't talk a lot about it, from certain angles, these rivers that go through Indianapolis would start to appear in the artwork. So it's not meant to be a billboard per se, but if you're in the right place on the right time, you can start to see something in it if you look. And I think method then has to do with the way that it's actually made. I won't get into it this evening because I think it's a different lecture, but there's a big part of my practice where we actually develop and then fabricate artworks in my studio. We build custom robots to help us with these things. And again, I'd love to show more of that, but that turns into a much longer lecture. But I think, but suffice to say, method really has to do with how do these raw materials transform into the artwork. And so these three things are actually really important. I think with the imagery, what I really like, and I'm going to share with you guys on the South Pavilion, is this idea of, or both really for that matter, of the halftone. And everybody knows what a halftone image is. If you've ever looked very closely at a photograph in a magazine or a newspaper, if you get up close enough, you'll see it's actually made of lots of little color dots. And this was something that I thought would be kind of an interesting technique to be part of the artwork. The method, it has to do with origami and how you can take, in this case, it'll be pieces of aluminum and start to fold them like you would fold like a paper airplane or a piece of paper into an airplane. So a series of bends and angles that are carefully controlled. And I think the biophilic design portion of it, and you can see the first rendering down here, in reading through that history, one of the things that came up often were these bluebells that were native to the area. As well as cherry blossoms. And so for the first station, which I'm going to show is the South Pavilion, the imagery that is, let's say, loosely within the artwork and certainly the color scheme is driven by these native bluebells, and you can kind of see the color palette that is resulting in up here. That method I talked about, it'll make more sense in a moment, but there are hundreds and hundreds of these little folded elements which are rectangular and painted green, and then with a layer of these colored kind of circular discs that start to work with that half-tone. Oops, can you go? I'm getting a little bit out of order here. Oh, I'll go here. So here we're seeing this is on the South Pavilion. This is looking along the south side of the South Pavilion. So this will, it becomes this artwork that wraps around three sides of the building. So if anybody has seen, this is the one that's, I think, more easier to see along the road, and so what people have probably seen thus far is it's very much a glass-wrapped building. So the artwork is going to be seen both from outside as people drive by and as they're using it, but it will also have, I think, a fairly strong presence from the inside. I'm very excited. This is the first artwork I've done that I would say is very volumetric in the way that it works. And by that, I've done, in my studios, worked on a number of artworks which are very, very large in scale, but they tend to be very flat. So I'm very interested to see how this is going to be when it's finished, because as you can kind of see from the rendering, it does wrap around the west, south, and east sides as a continuous artwork. And so here you'll see, these are all these painted aluminum discs. The imagery is vague in the way that it shows up, and this is for a reason. Sometimes people ask, if you're going to use imagery, why don't you make it more visible, like so I can see the flower directly in the image or in the artwork? And there's kind of a reason for this. While I'm well aware that might be more satisfying because you say it's about flowers, so I want to see the bluebells in the artwork. I think there's also something to be said for the longevity of something. This isn't something that's going to be in the public space for 10, 20, 40, 50 years. And so, as a friend of mine says, it's you don't want to create a bad tattoo. You know, something that you see and you love it, and then 10 years later, you're like, oh, I wish that thing wasn't there. And I think, you know, maybe should come up with a better analogy, but I think the idea is that I had a child come up to, or teenager now, with the first project I showed. So that project's 8 years old. He said the first time he saw it, he was 5, and he saw just clouds. And then his parents, he was a patient in the hospital, unfortunately, and he's doing fine. But he was going there, and he said, when I was about 13, I saw it again, and I could see the river. And I thought that was really cool. And that kind of touched me, because that's the point. The point is not for it to be so vague you see nothing, but it shouldn't also be so literal that you see it once and it kind of fades into the background. And so that's the idea with the halftone for this. This is the halftone as a logic is something I've not done before, so it's very unique to the station. And then I also mentioned cherry blossoms, so I'm kind of pairing the bluebells with the cherry blossoms. The cherry blossoms are interesting. Maybe some of you know this. While they're both native, they're also a gift from Japan. And so in addition to both of those things, they also go through a lot of evolution. So people kind of pollinate and create these, really interesting hybrids. And they're like orchids a little bit in that respect. And so on the North Pavilion, a little smaller. It's and the artwork is situated above this very tall glass elevator facade. There's one last animation I wanted to show. Actually, I realized in speaking of imagining how the shapes of these elements may come up. I think it's the very last one, if you would. Oh yeah, you can play this. Yeah. No, that's fine. I forgot. Yeah, let's play. So this is what we're looking at here. Was part of the original presentation, I don't know, almost 2 years ago, which I think the artwork is still fairly true to, but really just an animation showing how this artwork, as I said, is really volumetric and will encompass, and wrap around the building. And if you can go, and when this is done, maybe they play that very last, if you wouldn't mind that very last. So what you'll see in a moment when I show a little close-ups of the North Pavilion, while it is smaller than the South Pavilion, the elements themselves are much more intricate, and they actually take on the imagery of a bluebell petals. And so what you're seeing right now is part of the process in my studio. As I mentioned, we write software that helps design these artworks. And this was a little piece of software we wrote that would just kind of synthetically go through different petal shapes and evolutions as if somebody were to kind of crossbreed bluebells for hundreds and hundreds of years in interesting ways. And so in some ways it's just kind of a formal study, but as you'll see in the renderings in a moment, thinking about how if each little element is unique, how does then hundreds of them working together, how does that portray, how does that create the artwork? I think that might be just the end of the video. If you want to, yeah, that's good. You can close it. That was the last video. Yeah. And so, as I said, the little slightly out of order. So these elements are, while not direct flower shapes, through a lot of evolution and looking at how these different forms not only would be interesting by themselves, but how they all then start to work together to kind of create this grassy field effect as people are starting to come into the space and then up the elevator. I think that's it. That's the last one. So thank you guys. It would be really great to hear feedback or questions. Yes?
What is the material used?
Mm-hmm.
Is it very reflective or the dowel is there?
Mm-hmm. Sure, it's a good question. So the artwork is composed of a structural system behind that we don't see, and that is entirely aluminum, and that is painted aluminum. The artwork elements themselves are all 1 millimeter thick aluminum that is laser cut, folded, and then it has a high grade architectural finish on it that's rated for many, many years.
So let's say 10 years, how will it weather in terms of less likely?
Yes. So This one, which has more of these kind of red tones in it, is actually the color was a little bit chosen because this is in a more of a shield, kind of a shielded environment. Red, anything that's red or deeper color sometimes fades a little bit over time from UV exposure. So if you go back, Laurent, if you can go back to the other one, whereas these, in the South Pavilion, and in the South Pavilion is much more exposed. And so I think the concern really with this is, UV exposure, but also rain and things like that. And so while it is an artwork, it also leans heavily into the materials that are used for building construction because those things are, time tested for exactly the same considerations.
Is there any method of upkeep and how do we do it?
Well, I mean, like anything like anything, dust is going to land on. There's a street that's going by. It's going to get rain because it's durable in terms of being able to spray it with a power washer or kind of follow whatever the standard. Generally, the idea is that the same cleaning procedures for the building, the architecture itself, carry over into the artwork.
I have a question for Anne. There's a metro project. I imagine that the name completely needs spray. So with that constraint, thinking about your selection of materials. What's your agency?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is something over the years, having the opportunity to work in a lot of different communities, different cities, states, there is some commonality. I mean, this is a very normal, common question that comes up, like, what if there's bird poop on it? Or what if somebody, in some cases, the bigger issue is vandalism. What if people want to grab it and take a piece home for a souvenir? That one's a little harder to address. Sometimes the material is upsized to make that difficult to do. With both of these, they're really out of the reach of people, so that's good. The major thing, especially with ridership in the hundreds of thousands or millions of people, that's the biggest issue. It's less like rain and things like that. But the other, as I said, there is, I can certainly get into some of the details, but there's a number of different coatings like Kynar, which we use, which is typically used for columns and sheet metal for buildings. And so they generally follows the same kind of warranty and cleaning procedures. I don't set the clean, usually every city has their own schedule of when they clean or don't clean. So I may not be the right person to ask for that, but I think what my responsibility is to create something that's beautiful and maybe looks delicate, but at the heart of what it is, it's actually still very typical and kind of durable, if that makes sense. Hi. Hi.
Thank you. I'm curious if there going to be any signage inside the station, like just giving some context or that you'd like to share about this for people passing through, because it's exterior primarily. So I'm just curious, if people get inside, will they be able to learn more about the effect or your intentions?
I can answer that question for you.
Sure.
Yes, there will be some signage actually at both pavilions. We're working on signage. And so there will be ways to access the basic information on the sign itself, and we're designing a tag that will also allow people to access a web page where you would get notification.
It's through a QR code, is that right?
That's
Yeah.
true, so we've got both, yes.
Yeah.
And then the tag will also have a slide relief for presentation for people who can touch. Will have more utility, will be able to experience in some way, and just a better outcome.
Great.
Rob,
Yes.
what did you do to it to keep the glare off of it when people driving down the Potomac Ave on a sunny day? And,
Yeah. Well, so where I live in Los Angeles, about 5 years ago, it was big news that Frank Gehry's Disney Concert Hall was both reflective in a mirror-like way and also conveniently a parabolic shape. And there was this poor woman's apartment that was getting up over 100 degrees every day, and it was melting some of her furniture. So this was on the newspaper. We all saw it, and as someone who, I don't do Frank Gehry, but those kind of concerns are real, right? That can happen. Or even just simply, what if you blind somebody? They're just driving and on, it's a perfect storm, the sun's shining, it reflects in their eyes, and they're like, go off the road. That's what keeps me up at night, honestly. So that said, much of it has to do with the finish. So when you paint anything, and maybe people are familiar with this, you go to Home Depot and you say, I want to paint my room this color. Okay, do you want matte? Do you want satin? Do you want high gloss? Do you want it to look like a mirror? And so I think first and foremost, we've kind of picked this semi-satin sheen. So you have to, this almost goes back to the maintenance. If it's too non-reflective, it tends to capture dirt really in a way that's not helpful. If it's glossy, it's great with dirt, but then you start blinding people. So we find this kind of in-between area that will give us the colors we want, but it still has kind of a sheen that kind of avoids that. I think the other has to do with just being aware. These are hundreds and hundreds of little discs that have an angle, and so we do our best to make sure they're not all like facing any direction in particular. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Am I to understand if it is a movable? As it a moving, so considering a walking, or are they stationary?
Completely stationary. Yeah. Now that said, we could play the animation again. It's similar to some past work I've done. There is a pretty significant thought process thinking how people will see it as they come from the south or how they come from the west, and even if they move around the site. So from some angles, it will appear to be fairly transparent. You'll be able to see through the glass into the building. And if you move 50 feet and look in the exact same place, it becomes very opaque and you see all these colorful circles. So while the artwork elements don't move at all, that doesn't mean there won't be, I think, kind of a variability in the experience that people see. So people like things that move because they can stand there and it kind of, makes a show or whatever. I don't find that particularly interesting. I've done that type of thing before. I'm more interested in things that don't move at all and really encourage people to move around to look at it. And it just happens to also, maintenance-wise, be a much better approach to public art as well. Hi.
Hi, do you have a nighttime effect that you plan for lighting at all with Barry?
It will, and I don't have a rendering to show that. What I will say with this one is because it's hard to see, granted, but it is all clear glass behind the artwork. And the artwork, the support system for all of these elements is a very open mesh. So it's structural, but it will let light from the inside out. So it'll behave much like a lantern with all these little elements around it. So I can't show it to you. I guess that'll be a nice thing that we can all see when it's done, but that will be the way that it operates.
So how do you clean glass?
These are actually operable, so I don't have a slide showing this, but these are on independent panels that can swing so that to give access to the glass.
Any other questions for us?
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Rob. And as Rob said, the artwork is going to be installed in time for when the metro station opens this spring. So as you're traveling up Potomac Avenue and all that, please be sure to check out the progress. I do want to give another word of thanks to the WMATA Art and Transit program. For those folks that are familiar with public art in Alexandria, we have a very specific process that we follow for public art here. And I want to thank WMATA Art and Transit for, kind of bending how they were approaching the project to accommodate as much of our process as possible. So I don't know if we have any members of the Public Art Task Force here tonight. I don't know that they were able to come, but the Arts Commission, some of those members are here, but the Arts Commission also had a role, so a big thanks to WMATA for that, and a big thanks to Rob. We're looking forward to adding your beautiful artwork to our city, so thank you.
Thank you all.
The reception's still going on, so if you were too shy to ask Rob a question in front of everybody, please, come up and talk to him, help yourself to some more food, and maybe our next event will be at the station to see, maybe we'll do a nighttime event so we can see how it looks at night. So, all right, thanks everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Have a great night.
Thank you. Thank you very much.